Yeah, I like that one. Morihei Ueshiba was the founder of Aikido. You've probably heard of Steven Seagal. He was the Grand Master of Aikido, and he had many, many students. Takamatsu was the 33rd Grand Master of Ninjutsu, he was Hatsumi's teacher. I've trained with Hatsumi many times, so I never obviously met Takamatsu. He died long ago. That was a really fun song. I always like to imagine these two huge giants of the martial arts. Um, I just imagine them fighting. I don't know if anyone's ever imagined this dream match between these two. And on that one, I wanted to really experiment with the tempos of the taiko drums and rhythm on the track. You'll hear when I shift into gear about halfway through the song, I bump up the beats per minute from around 100 BPMs to well over 200 BPMs. So I wanted to shift the speed of the song up quite a bit. And that's designed to amp up your training and your heart rate. When playing this live, when I was recording it, I would imagine this movie scene and the battle between Takamatsu and Ueshiba on a mountaintop in Japan and fighting to the death. And as the tension of the fight builds in my mind, the tension and the speed builds of the song as well. So it is a soundtrack. I just wanted a climactic finish at the end. Now, who would have won this fight, I don't know. There's a large history between these two men that is really kind of mysterious. As you know, in martial arts, people can make up a lot of stories. So the true history of Ueshiba and Takamatsu is, there are not books on these men. I think there are books on Ueshiba. There are no books on Takamatsu that I know of. A little bit of history on the men is kind of neat. I like to study the history. I know that Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, was born in 1883. Takamatsu was born in 1889. So Takamatsu was 6 years older than Ueshiba. Now, this is a different time in Japan. Way back then, the samurai were just fading out, and there was a clash between the old days and the new. So people back then actually still went around and fought to the death and went to different dojos and challenged each other. They came from a different age, because the Second World War in Japan created large changes in the perception of martial arts as a cultural necessity. Ueshiba, the Aikido founder, he studied Daito-ryu from his teacher Sokaku in the 20s and 30s. And then Ueshiba developed it into what's called Daito-ryu Aikijujutsu. And back then, that included more striking and weaponry. Later, Ueshiba drifted away from Takeda, which is not uncommon. A lot of students drift away from their teachers and develop their own style. Very common. In 1942, Ueshiba formed what we call Aikido, which you've heard of. It's called the Way of Harmony. It's an interesting martial art. Ueshiba had a dojo in Tokyo, but after, as I said before, after World War II, that his dojo closed. And then Ueshiba, I think, opened a dojo in Iwama, which is an area of Japan, and he stayed there for like 40 more years till he died. It was interesting because Ueshiba was Japanese people are smaller in general. Ueshiba actually failed his military entrance because he was less than 5'2", so he was a small man. And Takamatsu as well was small. The older he got, Ueshiba became more and more spiritual, and he seemed to jettison away many of the hard strikes of the old Daito-ryu to focus more on using the opponent's energy against themselves. And Aikido is very well known for that. We call these throws kokyunage, or air throws, and it's basically when an opponent comes at you, your timing is so good that you use his force against him to bring about his own downfall. Ueshiba was big on restraining the opponent in order to avoid harm. Ueshiba has 4 generations of students now since his death in 1969, so I think he died of liver cancer. Another interesting story is Ueshiba's wife died just 2 months later than he did, so there was some sort of connection there where his wife died right away. Now, when Ueshiba died, he had several prominent Aikido students who naturally became masters in themselves and built their own schools. Ueshiba had tons of students in Japan. Many styles of Aikido still exist even now. It's a large martial art with many different branches. And as I said before, Steven Seagal, the movie star, is an Aikido teacher. He brings it to fame through his movies. Seagal actually had a dojo in Japan. He is the real deal despite his faults, which we all have. Seagal is actually, I think, a Nana Dan, a 7th Dan in Aikido. He's good. For you to be a Westerner to have a dojo in Japan, you have to be pretty good. What he does in his personal life is separate from his martial art expertise. So Ueshiba had far more influential impact in Japan than I think Takamatsu ever did. Again, that's my opinion, but being a ninja, I am sure Takamatsu preferred to be in the shadows, so that's something that he probably wanted to have. Now, Takamatsu is a different type of person. He was the 33rd generation teacher of ninjutsu, and he taught Hatsumi, who was the 34th grandmaster. And Hatsumi is the current grandmaster of the organization called the Bujinkan, which is flourishing right now. As of today, Hatsumi is 83 years old as of this year. No one knows yet who Hatsumi will choose as his successor, but my opinion is when he does die that it's going to go all to hell. The Bujinkan is going to spur even more because there are a lot of large egos in martial arts. So I have a feeling when he does go, there'll be a huge outpouring of new organizations and dojos around the world. So very little is known of Takamatsu. I don't know much about him. There's obviously more you can read about on the internet. But be skeptical because a lot of these stories are completely hyped up, almost legendary, and I don't believe half of them. Takamatsu died in 1972 of an illness, so he would have been about 83 as well. He had many nicknames. One of his nicknames was Moku no Tora, which translates into English as the Mongolian Tiger. He had a lot of different nicknames. He was well known as a great fighter. He used to travel to China when he was young, and he would fight people to the death. Again, this was an odd time where people would challenge each other, sometimes to the death. It's kind of a bizarre way of thinking nowadays, morally, but it did happen. It's almost like the Old West, where people would travel to prove their superior technique. Not too much is known of Takamatsu. His father owned a match factory. I think he was married, and I think he adopted a daughter. There's controversy that remains whether Takamatsu is the true inheritor of the ninja lineage from Toda Sensei, which was his teacher, but that's obviously still in dispute. I'm not a historian. And again, legendary stories were abundant with these older guys. No verification of the truth could be established, so you have to take these things with a grain of salt. There's a story that Takamatsu once was attacked by bandits, and one of the bandits grabbed him around the waist, and the bandit fell to the ground in pain, clutching his face, and Takamatsu, I guess, felt something warm in his hand, only to discover he had ripped out the man's eyeball. So these are the stories you hear about Takamatsu. Is that true? I don't know. Again, legends are always more interesting than reality. It's said that Takamatsu killed 12 men in challenges to the death. And I guess he even threatened to kill a karate master because he insulted Takamatsu through a newspaper article saying that Takamatsu was outdated or something like that. Now, it's also said that Ueshiba knew some ninjutsu. but performing these techniques, Ueshiba said, would age him prematurely, so he stayed away from showing any of that, as far as I know. Now, Takamatsu was the 33rd Grandmaster. He received the scrolls from Toda Sensei at the age of 22. Now, that's a young age. I don't think it's possible for someone to understand what he was given at that age, never mind be a master at it. But the Japanese mindset is when you receive something, an award or a rank, you are supposed to live up to that award. A lot of the teachers believe you weren't actually there yet. Whereas in the West, if you got your black belt, a Westerner in his arrogance can, just thinks I am a black belt. No, not really. That's not the Japanese mindset. The Japanese mindset is, I'm going to give you this rank or this title so that you will earn it and you will become more of a warrior to earn the title, but it's almost always premature. So it's not uncommon for someone to get the scrolls of the lineage or become, quite a headmaster or something at a young age. So seeing this two paired up in battle would have been cool. Now, I've met Hatsumi many times. I've trained with him a lot, and he's a scary guy. He's the type of person where you just don't know what's going to happen next. And the very few times that I've actually physically worked with him where he was having me attack him, it was like punching air. I just didn't know what he was going to do. And he has a reputation of being scary too. So I can't imagine how scared Takamatsu must have been a very scary man. And even Hatsumi says in his writings that Takamatsu was the real deal. He was a real killer warrior, what they called the last remaining ninja. So seeing Takamatsu and Ueshiba paired in battle would have been so cool to see. So when I was composing that song, I was imagining them fighting. Now, studying videos of Takamatsu at a much older age, I think that Ueshiba might have persevered in a fight. I think Ueshiba might have won. That can be very controversial. It's just my opinion. I've been training for 35 years now, so I know good movement when I see it. And although Takamatsu was elderly when he was being filmed on these videos I've seen, far past his prime, there's no doubt that Ueshiba moved way better than Takamatsu in his old age. Again, this is my opinion. Ueshiba trained full-time, and I think he trained far, far more than Takamatsu did in his older age. But I'm not taking anything away from Takamatsu. But Ueshiba had a lot more students than Takamatsu did. So what's cool is I can imagine Ueshiba taking Takamatsu down on this mountaintop in a storm, and Takamatsu almost faking his death, and then being the ninja that he is. I can imagine Takamatsu kind of, laying prone on the ground and then ripping out Ueshiba's eye or pulling out a shuriken or throwing dirt in his eye and doing some real ninja dirty fighting to finally win the battle. So who would actually win, I don't know. I like to imagine both of them winning and losing at certain points. So it's fun to compose music to these. It's kind of like being the soundtrack to the movie that doesn't exist. But I like to study the history of these men and learn what they went through in life. It was a different time. We just couldn't do what they used to do. Nor should we be expected to. We'd be arrested if we went to the dojo down the street and challenged the karate master to the death. You could only do that once. So it's just interesting, the history of these men. And again, I'm just touching the surface. There are books out there. Both are very interesting men to learn about if you are a serious martial artist.